Hello everyone. Welcome to Interactivity with JavaScript and jQuery. So for this workshop, we're going to quickly go over what interactivity is, the document object model, and how you add interactivity using JavaScript, and how you can do the same using jQuery. So first, we're going to define what interactivity is. Well, since we're working with JavaScript and jQuery, which relates to websites, interactivity on a website is the website's ability to respond to user inputs. So that could be you clicking a button or typing text into an input field and then clicking the submit button. Most of the time, it's a button or some form of click event, or even a hypertext reference. So if you've written a website, if you want to link to another page, you use the ahref tag. That's a hypertext reference, and when you click on it, it redirects you to another page. That is interactivity. So why do we want interactivity? So if it was like 1999, a static web page is probably really good. But it's not 1999, it's 2022. So we want actually nice websites where it isn't really a blog. You can actually do things. So some examples could be like an online calculator, such as Symbol Lab. We all know what that is. Or a user registration form. So like if you were making a new Google account, those forms are interactive with the backend. Or customer support tickets. When your computer breaks and it's not a scam, then you can submit a ticket for some help. So websites back in the day were kind of just like news website, blogs. You used it to just display useful information for people to see. But now we want people to be able to do things on their own on the website just from clicking or entering inputs. All right, so how do we achieve this? Well, we're just going to use our quote-unquote good friend JavaScript. I say quote-unquote good friend because not everyone likes JavaScript, but it does its job. So to interact with a web page, we first need to know what the document object model is. The document object model, or DOM, is a programming interface for web documents. It allows us to write programs that can change the document structure, style, and content. But how does this actually work? So if you, assuming that you've written an HTML website before, we're used to giving elements and attributes such as a class or an ID so that you can target it in a CSS file to apply styles to it. So the DOM also allows programs written in languages, in our case JavaScript, to target those elements on a page and edit the information about them. So similar to how you can define a class for a set of paragraphs and then target those specific class of paragraphs in the CSS file to change either the font style, font color, or anything about it, you can do the same thing in JavaScript using document.getElement by class name or getElement by ID. So how do we target classes on the DOM? So as I just mentioned, to target an element by a class name, you just use document.getElement by class name, and then in quotes, you would put the class name you're targeting. So if I created 5 paragraph tags or p tags with the class paragraph, I could target it by using document.getElement by class name paragraph. And classes, since there can be more than one class, it's not like an ID where there should only be one, and if you have more than one ID, you've already messed up. Classes, there can be multiple. So when you use document.getElement by class name, it returns an array of DOM elements that have the specified class name. And to access each and every one of the elements, you can just go through it with the loop. So here you can see we just have let elements equal to document.getElement by class name class 1. So this goes through the entire web page that is linked to this JavaScript file or block, looks for all the elements with a class name of class 1, and then puts it into a list or an array and stores it as elements. And then in the for loop, we go from 0. Just like any other loop, you start from 0, and you go up to the length of elements, which is, again, an array. And then you can do whatever you want to the elements, change CSS, add action listeners. So now targeting IDs, you would, instead of getElement by class name, you would use getElement by ID and then the ID name. This returns the DOM element that matches the specified ID name, or null if there is no match. It doesn't return an array, it just returns the element or null. Alright, any questions? Check the chat. Oh. Alright. So now how do we add JavaScript to websites? So there's 3 ways to do it. inline, internally, and externally. So for inline, it could be as simple as an onClick attribute. So you can have button onClick equals to, and then you can put your JavaScript in those quotes. So in this case, the JavaScript function is alert hello world, where if you click the button, a pop-up appears in your browser that just says hello world. Internally, you can just have script tags, and you would normally put these at the end of right before the closing body tag. So you can create a button with an ID of click me, and then again document.getElementById by ID click me dot on click. So dot on click is the attribute of whatever is returned by document.getElementById by ID. So in this case, it returns the DOM element that represents the button, and then you add a click function to it that does alert hello world. And inline and internal JavaScript is generally not recommended for readability, because if you end up writing a lot of JavaScript, it becomes hard to read, and it's just nicer in a separate file. And especially inline's even worse. So the other way, and the pretty much industry standard, is external. So in an HTML file, you can again create a button with an ID click me, and then using the script tags, instead of putting all of your JavaScript inside in between the two script tags, you would just put the source to a JavaScript file and link it. So, and you always put the script tags at the bottom, again right before the closing body tag. This is because HTML pages load from top to bottom. So it would load all of the HTML elements followed by all the CSS elements, and then by putting it at the bottom, it loads the JavaScript last. If you put it at the top, what could happen is the JavaScript here could do document like element by ID click me, but if the button wasn't loaded before this function was loaded, then you would have an error because JavaScript wouldn't be able to find the element click me. So moving on with interactivity, we have events. Adding interactivity requires the use of events, which are fired off automatically by the DOM. So as mentioned and shown previously, we have click, which is what we're going to mainly focus on for this workshop. But there are other events such as key press or mouse over. So key press is fired off whenever you press a key, and mouse over is whenever the user moves a mouse. There are, I believe, hundreds of other events that you can work with. So as I just said, we're only going to really focus on the click event for this workshop. So this is fired off whenever the user clicks something on the DOM. So you just spamming your mouse on the browser is technically firing off a bunch of click events. But in order for it to actually interact and make changes or do anything, you need to add what is essentially an action listener, which is how we were doing it before. So if we go back to here in main.js JavaScript file, you have document like element by ID dot on click equals a function. That is adding a click listener to the element that has an ID click me. Okay. So we're going to do a quick demo of how to do click events. So I'm going to tab to okay, and then all 3. Okay. So for the first click demo, we have 3 buttons, 1, 2, and 3. Ignore this one. This is just there. We're going to add a click event to each of the 3 buttons below that logs the inner HTML value of the button to the console. So before we do that, inner HTML is just an attribute of a DOM element that returns the HTML text in between the 2 tags. So in this example here, the button hello world with an exclamation point has an inner HTML value of exactly hello world with an exclamation point. So for the 3 buttons we have here, the first one has an inner HTML value of 1, and this one has 2, and that one has 3. And what we want to do for this is to add a click event to each of the buttons so that we can log it to the console. So if you want to open the console, this is a Windows computer, so you would just use F12. I'm not sure how to do it on a Mac because I hate Macs. So we're going to go to code, Alt2, whoops. So click demo. So all 3 buttons here have an ID. They have ID button 1, button 2, button 3. I'm going to do this all in an external JavaScript file because, good practice. Let's see. So click events. So we're going to add a click event to each of the buttons. So we're going to do document. No, that's not how you spell. Get element by ID, and it was button 1. Nope. Stop. dot on click equals function, and then you would just do console.log this dot inner HTML. So in this instance, the keyword this always refers to whatever element you're targeting. So if this was document get element by ID button 2, then it would target button 2 and read the inner HTML value to console log. So just testing this first one, which we're going to switch. Did that switch? It did switch. Cool. If I refresh the page, which it looks like I did, if I click 1, it logs 1 to the console. So what we're going to do is repeat that for all the other two buttons. So again, you would just do document.get element, nope, by ID, and then you would do button 2, nope, that's a 1. Again, on click equals function console.log, again, this.inner HTML. And again, for the third button, same thing, but just button 3. So I'm just going to copy it. It's recording, yeah, okay. So if I save this, switch back to the browser, refresh. Now if I click 1, logs 1, click 2, logs 2, click 3, logs 3. Very fancy. So now, instead of logging to the console for the second one, let's add a click event to these 3 buttons, A, B, and C, such that when you click it, it edits the text of a div that has an ID of text area. So I've created a div that has text area. When you click A, B, and C, it should just start writing A, B, C's and just appending it pretty much infinitely. And if you click reset, it should clear it to only say text area, just as it originally says. Let's see. So we're going to go back to click events. So we have the buttons, which actually this time they have classes. So instead of targeting the IDs, we're going to target it by class. So in click events, instead of using document to get element by ID, we will have one that just calculates the. So we can say let buttons equals get element by class name, and I think I named it alpha buttons. Was it with an S? Nope. Alpha button. And then we're going to loop through and add a click event to each one such that it appends to the inner HTML of text area. So equals 0. Alright, and then it was ID text area, so the element by ID text area dot inner HTML plus equal to let's see, buttons of I dot inner HTML. So what this does is it targets the inner HTML of text area. So in this case, the inner HTML of text area is right in between the two div tags. And it appends using plus equals for every button I the inner HTML value. So this is just creating the listener. Wait, I think that's actually, this is wrong. Actually, nah, yeah, this is not going to work. Whoops. Forgot to actually create the on-click listener. So this should actually be, let's see, buttons of I dot on click equals function. That's not how you spell function. And then we put this inside the function. Now what it actually does is it adds the on-click listener to every button in buttons. So our document.getElement by class name alpha button returns an array of of the 3 buttons here, A, B, and C, and an dot on click on each element going through a loop adds a listener to it such that it would edit the text area, which like I just said was in between the 2 div tags, with the inner HTML value of the actual button. So if I save this, go back to here, refresh. Yep. If I click A, it appends A, click B, it appends B, click C, and then I can just click as many times as I want. Very nice. And now we actually want to do the reset button, which I didn't do, so now you want to reset this, so back here, it's all 2. Now, because the reset button is just an ID, we can just target it the same way we did for the first demo, so you would just go .get element by ID with reset, what did I name it? Reset area, on click. equals function. And then in this case, what we're going to do is edit the inner HTML of text area. So again, document get element by ID text area dot inner HTML equals to. Did I write? No, I didn't. Okay, so just set it to an empty string. So now if I refresh this, spam a bunch of A, B's, and C's, click reset, it gets deleted, and I can just do it as many times as I want. Very fancy. Whoops, forgot to switch to this. Yeah, yep, it works nice. So we don't need the console anymore. So go back to presentation. Any questions about what I just did? Because I might have gone quick on it.
I have a question, Kirk.
Yes.
So with these functions that are called in JavaScript, like in general, are they considered like asynchronous, or do you have a concept of asynchronous functions in jQuery? Like if you're, I guess, allowing multiple users to use the website, or is that just something that's kind of like not mentioned?
That is a good question that I can't answer. I would assume it is asynchronous because anybody who visits the website should not be able to interfere with the data of another person. So I think that's more browser based and kind of out of our control.
I got you.
Very.
Yeah, I guess it's more like a JavaScript syntax question. Like, I know sometimes you have to specify async versus like just getting a regular function. So
Right.
I'm just unsure, but maybe I'll search that up. I'll let you guys know if I find it.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. So now we're going to get into jQuery. So, what is jQuery? So, it is a feature-rich JavaScript library, and their motto is write less, do more. So, quite literally, it is designed to help you put in as little effort as you want and still have a feature-rich website. So, it enhances HTML document traversal and manipulation, which I will show you later on how it actually does that. Now, jQuery is old. It was initially released back in August of 2006, but it's still very powerful because some of the functions in jQuery are pretty much writing CSS for you, and we all know how annoying CSS is. So it's old, but it still works, and it's actually still widely used in web development in conjunction with React sometimes, because you create React components, but you still need JavaScript to do things. So you can mix and match jQuery and JavaScript all together. So how do you use jQuery? So like any other JavaScript files that you might write, so we go back to, was it here? Yes. So here, when we link a JavaScript file at the end using the script source tag, we named our file main.js for this slide, but for linking jQuery, you would just link the actual jQuery file. So you would download the jQuery file, and it's actually there's two ways. You can either download the jQuery file, which is recommended, or you can access it through a content delivery network, such as Google APIs. Now, the reason why it's more recommended to download the actual jQuery source file is, let's say Google's server decides to go down for any reason, then your website would break because it wouldn't be able to access the jQuery file. But if you have it stored locally, the only way that your website would break is if your own server went down or your file got corrupted. So like before with the main.js file, you would have script source equals, but instead of main.js, you would just have jQuery version number.min.js in the script tag, and again at the end right before the closing body tag, so everything loads correctly. So okay, so vanilla JavaScript versus jQuery. So what we've been doing in our demos is just vanilla JavaScript using document.getElement by ID, getElement by class name. That's just vanilla JavaScript. jQuery, they can be used interchangeably. So you can use document.getElement by ID and then use some built-in jQuery function in the body of your onClick event. So they can be used interchangeably to add interactivity. But then you might wonder, why does it exist if they both do the same things? Or why not just use vanilla JavaScript? Well, as you'll see later on, the syntax of jQuery, and again back to their motto, is to write less, do more. If you can write less and do more, isn't that just better than writing document.getElement by ID 20 times? I would say pretty much yes. So selecting, if you recall back before, so selecting an ID on the DOM using regular JavaScript, you would use document.getElement by ID and then specify the ID name. In jQuery, you would just use $ and then in quotes the ID name, but you have to actually use the pound sign this time to denote that it is an ID name. Same thing in selecting a class, except you would use a dot. So in vanilla JavaScript, you would use document.getElement by class name and specify the class name. And in jQuery, you would use, again, the $ notation to create a jQuery object, specify the class name with a period. So the use of the period and the pound sign is what allows jQuery to be much simpler compared to vanilla JavaScript. Whereas in vanilla JavaScript, you have two separate document functions to target IDs or classes. In jQuery, you can all do it as one document selector. So what else can jQuery do? So jQuery, as you already saw, we can change how we target elements on a web page. But it isn't only used to like shorten our code. It comes with a lot of built-in functions that like I said, write CSS under the hood for you. So there's functions like hide or fade toggle that what it essentially does is edit CSS's visibility attribute to be hidden or visible. So one of the best examples of why you should use jQuery is the fade in and out effect. So doing this without jQuery, you have to use keyframes in CSS. So here you would define a keyframe called fade in, where it goes from 0 to 100%. You would go from opacity 0 to opacity 1. And then to do a fade out, you would define another keyframe called fade out that goes from 0 to 100%. Execution, you would go from opacity 1 down to 0. In jQuery, there's a built-in function called fade in and another one called fade out. So in this case, you would use $ID name. So that's just targeting a specific ID on the page that has an ID name and telling it to fade in. So if it was already hidden, it would fade in, and if it was already visible, nothing would happen. And same thing on the other side, you can target the element to do fade out. So if it was not visible already, then nothing will happen, and if it was visible, then it would just fade away slowly. And alternatively, instead of using fade in and fade out, you can use fade toggle. So fade toggle just goes in between. If it's visible, then it makes it invisible. If it's invisible, it makes it visible. So we're going to do a demo of jQuery now. Very fancy stuff. So, whoops, did not mean to do that. Full screen, hold up. Alright, go back to here. Alright, so in jQuery HTML, our first task, which we'll go back to here. Alright, refresh. So for the first one, we're going to want to add a click event to each of the 3 buttons below. Again, we have A, B, and C. But instead of, so if you remember from the first one, we did A, B, and C you're still using class select. So we're just repeating the click demo here, but instead of using vanilla JavaScript, so instead of using the document like element by class name, we're going to use the jQuery class selector that does the exact same thing. So switching to code. Alright, so let's see, jQuery demo. So again, we have 3 buttons with a class alpha button, A, B, and C, and a reset button. So in jQuery.js, instead of doing that, we're going to just do let buttons equals to. So now instead of using document like element by class name, we're going to use $. And then we can do .alpha button. And that returns a list of jQuery object buttons. So now again, we're going to loop through this. 0, less, nope. Let's see. Buttons.length. And then again, buttons of I and dot on, no. Dot on. Let's see, dot on click equals. All right, and again, we're editing the text area. So in this, nope, that's not it. Where am I going? All right. So the text area has an ID of reset area. So we're equals function. And then we're going to do, again, instead of using document like element by ID, now we're going to use $ operator again and target text area. What was it? I think it was .value, maybe. No, it was .text. So .text and .inner HTML do essentially the same thing. Text is whatever is in between the 2 tags, same as inner HTML. .text, so we're going to do buttons of I dot value. Actually, this may or may not work. I actually don't know if this will work, but I'll find out. So switch back to nope. Here, if I refresh, did I get any errors? I did not. So this is gonna work. Nope, I broke something. Very fancy. What did I do wrong? Alpha button. Do I actually need to do .inner HTML? I don't think so. I don't think this is even valid. Alright, what am I doing wrong? Buttons I dot click equals function. Alright, what am I actually doing wrong? I swear I did this before and it was fine. Buttons, alpha button, buttons length, button dot click equals function. Oh, this is interesting. I swear this actually works. When $sign alpha buttons. Alright, I have no idea what I'm doing wrong because I made this presentation last week and I tested the code last week and I don't remember what I did. Yeah, I don't know what I did wrong. Well, this sucks. Alright. So, just going to skip that for now until I think of how to fix it if I ever do, which I don't know if I will. And the second jQuery demo, which I hope will actually work, is to add a click event to the button where we have it. So we created a button called fade, which was visible here, button called fade, such that, nope, stop doing that. When you click on it, it should force the image with an ID of image that is linked to just a simple image to fade in and out, so using the fade toggle. So here we will just do target the ID fade, which targets the image, dot click equals function that is yelling at me why bind an event handler. What? Oh wait. Oh wait, I think I know. Hold up. It should be click function. You know what? I'm just gonna use the other way. Dot on. Fuck. Could have sworn it was click and then function like that. And you're still yelling at me and I don't know why. You know what? We'll just use dot on and then click. Because I think this will actually work. So such that then you can do this, nope, dot fade toggle. And this should work. So if I refresh the page, or not, on fade toggle, did I do that wrong? Oh wait, I'm not supposed to target this. I'm supposed to target the image element. So that would be name the ID of image. So target image dot fade toggle. So I click fade, it fades Oswald right into the page. Click it again, fades it out, and I can click this as many times as I want, and it'll fade in and out. All right, I think I know what I did wrong for this one. It should be dot on click, and then move this inside function, and then put the closing parentheses at the end. The inner HTML plus equal to buttons of I dot value, not dot value dot. So if I refresh that, or not, buttons of I dot on. Alright, yeah, I don't know what I did wrong with that one, so I'm not even going to bother fixing it. Alright, well, moving on. So if I go back to this, it's Alt-1. So, quick summary of what we just went through very quickly in about 40 minutes. So, we covered the basics of interactivity on web pages using JavaScript and jQuery. So as you saw in, so I'm going to go back to it here. Was it this one? Yes. So, no, what's it not? Yeah. So here, as you can see, if this example was going to work, you can see how I'm interchangeably using vanilla JavaScript. So .inner.html is vanilla JavaScript with jQuery objects and their built-in functions like .on and then specifying the actual event to listen for. So we can use them interchangeably to add interactivity to our websites. Back to this. Any last minute questions?